Hello, my name is Dan Skip Allen, and this is the Top 5 Weekly. This is a special episode of the Top 5 Weekly where all month long in the month of August, we are doing classic topics. We have already done Alfred Hitchcock as a classic director. We have already done Humphrey Bogart as a classic actor. And this week we are doing as a classic actress, Audrey Hepburn. And who else would I have with me but none other than Mr. Andrew Cabral? Introduce yourself once again, my friend.
Hello everyone. Yes, my name is Andrew, and I'm always here. I'm like Jack Nicholson in The Shining. I'm always here.
And I'm glad you are, because we wouldn't have a show if you weren't here. So we're going to be talking about Audrey Hepburn films. She's the younger sibling of Katharine Hepburn, but she stands on her own as one of the greatest actresses of all time, and she's in some she has played some iconic characters. And so, with that being said, let's get into it. Andrew, what is your number 5 Audrey Hepburn film?
My number 5. Well, before I get into my number 5, Audrey Hepburn and Katharine Hepburn actually aren't related.
What? I thought they were.
That's a good thing to know. No, I thought they were related, but they are not.
I can't
For
believe
years I thought that too. They are not related at all.
Wow.
But that's just a good thing to know, because they do have the same last name. And with all of the Hollywood families that are out there, it's kind of nice to know who's related and who's not.
Wow.
But my number 5 is a movie called Charade. This was a film that came out in 1963, directed by Stanley Donen, of course, starring Audrey Hepburn, but also starring a couple of other actors you may have heard of, chief among them being Cary Grant, one of my favorites of all time, but also Walter Matthau, James Coburn, and George Kennedy. So you have an interesting group of named actors that are relatively well known, at least well known by cinephiles. But this film, I think, is super underrated. Not a lot of people talk about this film, and I think it's a film that is very solid in both the filmographies of Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant. This was one of Cary Grant's last films. He would retire sometime in the mid to late 1960s from acting. I mean, he had been acting for a very long time, pretty much from the 30s onward. But this is very much Audrey Hepburn in her prime. You know, this is right around the time she would do another film that we are probably going to talk about. So I won't mention it now. But this film is kind of a murder mystery film. You could say it's a bit of a neo-noir with a little splash of Hitchcock in it. I've always thought that Alfred Hitchcock actually directed this movie, because if you see the poster of this movie, it has kind of a very Vertigo-esque look to it. I think they were maybe trying to capitalize on a kind of the Alfred Hitchcock films, or the themes in his film. And this film, like I said, is a murder mystery, all centered around the character that Audrey Hepburn plays. Her husband has been murdered. Her character's name is Regina Lambert, or Lampert, and her husband is murdered, and it's all about her trying to find out why he was murdered and all this kind of stuff. And she kind of goes on a bit of an adventure with Cary Grant in this film, you know. And it's not so much romantic as it is kind of them just trying to figure things out. And it's a nice kind of mysterious film where she doesn't quite know who the Cary Grant character is throughout the movie. Walter Matthau kind of plays a more serious role than I think all of us are used to seeing Walter Matthau play. He's a bit of a bad guy in this movie. James Coburn is also a bad guy in this movie. It's a very solid movie. I'd highly recommend people checking it out. It's not one of her more well-known films, at least I don't believe so. Perhaps it is, and I'm just not aware of that. But I really like it, and I always love seeing Cary Grant on screen, regardless of what film he's in. It was nice that they were able to get these two iconic actors and actresses on screen together.
Yeah, well, the thing is, her husband was in the military, and these guys were all like part of his platoon, or whatever you want to call it. And I guess they found a bunch of money, and that's what happened. They were coming after him to get the money. And the thing that's the odd thing about the Cary Grant character is he keeps changing his name in the movie. Why is he changing his name in the movie? I wonder. You know, so there's a lot of mystery involving the Cary Grant, the Peter character, the main name of the Cary Grant character. So yeah, Charade is definitely a good title for this movie. My number 5 is a film up until this week I hadn't even seen. I hadn't even heard about. But a friend of mine recommended it, and so I decided to seek it out and watch it to see if I would like it. And it's called Wait Until Dark. Now, Wait Until Dark is directed by Terrence Young, and it stars, obviously, Audrey Hepburn as a character by the name of Susie Hendricks. Her husband's Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. plays Sam Hendricks. And then you have some creepy characters, one in particular played by Alan Arkin called Rote. And then he also plays Rote Jr., Senior Rote. He plays like 3 versions of the character Rote. Also, we have Richard Crenna as Mike. And I'll tell you what, this is a film that has kind of a slow build to it. It really gets intense the further you go along in the film. And the reason why it's intense is the Susie Hendricks character is blind throughout the entire film. She's blind. She has to play. Audrey Hepburn is playing a blind woman. So she's feeling things out about people are lying, people are opening blinds, people are doing these kinds of things, people are dusting. And because she can't see, her other senses are heightened, and she's like feeling these things out, like, why is somebody open the blind? Why are people dusting? Why? And then she starts dealing with the phone. The phone is a big plot device in this film, and there's a little girl upstairs who helps her, and these guys are going after this doll. We don't know what's in the doll. Here we go with this MacGuffin thing again. The doll. The whole time the movie is going on, where these guys are asking, they're trying to find this doll. What is in the doll? Well, when you watch the movie, you'll find out what's in the doll. I mean, by today's standards, it's like, really, that's what's in the doll. But back in 1967, when this film came out, it wasn't something that's so prevalent in movies and so prevalent in society. But a frequent collaborator on the Top 5 Weekly, Jeff, recommended Wait Until Dark, so I watched it, and I'll tell you what, Audrey Hepburn has to do a lot to portray this character as a blind woman, and so that takes a lot of talent to be able to be believable as blind and be able to get through everything that she has to get through in this movie. And Alan Arkin, we've come to know him as this comedian of late, over the last 10 or so years, with Little Miss Sunshine and Going in Style and some of these kind of roles. But he was a nasty character, Rote, in this film. He was really weird in this film. I didn't even know he was in this film until I started watching it. So I have Wait Until Dark is my number 5. Andrew, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is going to be a bit of a surprise to people, not just because it's on my list, but because of where it is on my list. And this is probably Audrey Hepburn's most iconic role, the film that she is probably most associated with, and that is Breakfast at Tiffany's. That's my number 4. This film centers around... this film is directed by Blake Edwards, of course, starring Audrey Hepburn, but also starring kind of a love interest in an actor named George Peppard, who portrays Paul in the film. But the film also has Mickey Rooney and Patricia Neal is in it as well. And this is the film that I'm sure most people know Audrey Hepburn from. It's the film with probably her most iconic character in Holly Golightly, who is a bit of a, uh, a an interesting character in the sense that she uh, is kind of a prostitute, if you will. They don't quite come out and say it, but she does. Let's just say she gets paid to be an escort for men at times, things like that. It's not quite prostitution. They never go that line, but she is very much paid by men to be around her or be or be an escort for them. I mean, it's a very fine line they had to draw. This was 1961, so they were still dealing with certain things you could or could not put in film. This film is a wonderful film when it comes to her character. Audrey Hepburn is just fantastic on screen. She's a complex character with a lot of issues. I mean, and showing the whole romantic thing is just kind of one more thing to add to the baggage in her life. And you see all of these things come out as the film goes along. But this film does have the most iconic picture of her with the black dress and the pearls, and which is actually only in this film once, and that is at the very beginning of this film. It's kind of interesting how just that one shot kind of becomes symbolic of this entire film, and the film is about much more than that. The reason why I kind of rate this film below her other films, and not because I don't like it, it really comes down to the Mickey Rooney character of this film. It is one of the most obvious, one of the most blatant and terrible whitewashing, Asian stereotyped roles, I think, in all of mainstream Hollywood's history. It is really bad in modern context time, and I've read interviews with people who have said that if Mickey Rooney could go back, he wouldn't have done this role at all because it is that insensitive, and it's really obvious. It's played for comedy, but it really doesn't age well at all. But other than that, I think you remove that from the film, and this film is a really good film. It's definitely worth watching in her entire filmography because of how important it is in cultural history as well.
Yeah, you might get me to talk about that before the show is over.
Perhaps.
4. Can't believe you had it at 4. Oh my God, that's surprising to me. It's very surprising to me, Andrew. My number 4 is a film that a few years ago we got a remake to this film, starring Harrison Ford of all people. Harrison Ford wasn't really in a lot of romantic comedies, but he was in this one, and it was a remake of the 1954 film called Sabrina. Now, Sabrina, obviously, all the films on what we're talking about is Audrey Hepburn, is portrayed by Audrey Hepburn in this film. And she has this kind of relationship with this guy named David, played by William Holden. And she likes him and he likes her, and she's kind of going, having fun and doing something. All of a sudden, David's brother, Linus, gets involved in this kind of like relationship, and then we have this relationship between these two people. Now, Linus in this version of Sabrina is played by Humphrey Bogart, and Humphrey Bogart just is enamored with Sabrina, just like David was. Problem is, Humphrey Bogart wants David to marry this heiress so he can do this business deal. Now, the business deal is very much important for him so they can make money and whatnot. So he thinks, well, if he gets his brother David to marry the heiress, then he could swoop in and get with Sabrina. So we got this kind of a love triangle going on here between Sabrina and David and Humphrey Bogart, William Holden and Humphrey Bogart's character. Very, very fun movie. If you like a good romantic comedy, they don't do these kinds of movies anymore. They rarely do these kinds of movies anymore. But this is a really great film with great acting and great direction by I think William Wilder, Billy Wilder. I'm getting my directors mixed up because I got a William Wyler movie on here before this. So yeah, Billy Wilder. So this is the kind of film that he used to do. You know, he did a lot of these kinds of romantic comedies and stuff. But a lot of these films with Audrey Hepburn take place in Paris. If you watch her filmography, a lot of her films in her filmography takes place in Paris. I don't know if she lived in Paris or if she loved being in Paris or loved working in Paris or what the story was. But Audrey Hepburn did a lot of movies that took place in and around Paris. I mean, it's a great city. Don't get me wrong. Paris is a beautiful city. So why wouldn't you want to film all the beautiful things in that city? I mean, the people of France aren't necessarily the nicest, but the city's pretty beautiful. Here we got probably get a bunch of hate mail from a bunch of French people now. But I had Sabrina at number 4. Andrew, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is another film that is very much beloved and is very much associated with Audrey Hepburn, and that is My Fair Lady. My Fair Lady came out in 1964. It was directed by George Cukor, of course, starring Audrey Hepburn, but also starring Rex Harrison as well. And this film is very iconic. I mean, I use that word a lot, but, you know, Audrey Hepburn is very much an icon. And this film has been done in various play and theatrical and musical form before, afterward as well. In modern times, I mean, kids in high school do My Fair Lady. I mean, it's so well known. And in this film, basically, Rex Harrison portrays a really not nice guy. He's very snobbish. He's very misogynistic. He's also very wealthy. Perhaps that has to do with why he's the way he is. But Audrey Hepburn plays this very poor flower girl, and he decides that I believe on a bet, is going to sophisticate her, make her go from kind of a very poor, very unkept, very cockney, if you will, a street person, and make her seem as if she's aristocratic. And this film very much deals with their budding romantic relationship and the character transformation with the Audrey Hepburn character. You know, it's very much a musical as well as a romance and a drama, and it's a really great film. I mean, it's not a film it's not a film I actually grew up watching. I know a lot of people have. This is really a film I've only seen over the last couple of years, and I understand why it is so well remembered and why it is so beloved. It is one of her most famous roles for a reason. So I highly recommend people checking this out, even if you're not a fan of musicals. It's just a great film, directed by a great director in George Cukor.
Absolutely. George Cukor, we've been talking about him on the 52 must-see movies, and so he's a guy. When you watch a lot of these shows, especially Classics Month, and then you go back to the 52 must-see movies, there's a lot of crossover between Classics Month and the 52 must-see movies with directors and actors and so forth. And so you're going to hear us talk about these type of people. And George Cukor is one of them. He's a great director during that time. So I'm sure what movie have we talked about that he directed? I know we talked about one or two, haven't we? George Cukor?
Yeah, we have. I not yet, but Adam's Rib, starring Spencer Tracy and Audrey Hepburn, is one we will be discussing. I mean, he also did The Philadelphia Story, which, you know, Katharine Hepburn and Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant are in that film. He also did A Star Is Born with Judy Garland. So, I mean, he's no stranger to musicals or people singing in movies. So, yeah, he's someone you'll hear around the classic movie area. If you have classic movie friends, they'll know who George Cukor is.
Yeah. All right, my number 3 is a film that I guess my friends Andrew and Steven just did on the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. That's Roman Holiday. Came out in 1953. Audrey Hepburn plays an aristocrat. She plays a Princess Anne, and you know, she's young. She's in her early 20s, and she kind of like, she's sick of just, you know, meeting all these people, going to do these functions, and you know, people making up her schedule and people dressing her and making her eat food and do this and do that. And one night she decides she's gonna take off, get out of the palace, or whatever you call, of wherever where I think she's, what is it, Transylvanian? What is she? What is her nationality again?
They never say. In the movie, they never mention where she's from. She's just a princess touring Europe.
Okay. So she decides she's going to take off, get out of there, and go enjoy life like a 22-year-old girl would do. Go and have a good old time. Go do some dancing, have some drinking. And she runs into a young man named Gregory Peck. Of all people, Gregory Peck. I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, what he plays a character by the name of Joe Bradley, and he's a writer, and he works for a newspaper, and he's supposed to have an article about the princess. Little does he know that he ends up meeting the princess in a bar, and they start carousing and having fun and dancing and drinking and whatnot. It's not till the next day that he realized she's sleeping in his bed. Well, on the couch. And he has to go home and pick her up and put her in his bed. God forbid she finds out she's been sleeping on a couch. And this is the film that I was talking about, that William Wyler. Seeing the Netflix miniseries 5 came back. I highly recommend it. William Wyler, one of the great directors of that time, really a good American and cared about America, and he did a lot of films about World War II, trying to discourage some of the things that were going on in World War II in his films. But Roman Holiday, I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed this film. I thought Princess Anne, she's so innocent in this film, but you know she's up to no good sometimes. But Gregory Peck, he could have done some things wrong. Joe Bradley could have done some things wrong, but he doesn't. He treats her like a woman, and he acts like a man around her. And I really enjoyed Roman Holiday. And you know, the editor of the paper, he's a fun guy to be, because he's like, I want to get that scoop, I want to get that story, you know. And he tries to trick him, Joe Bradley, a little bit. But I enjoyed this film. I'm sure Andrew and Steven just talked about, so I'm sure they had a lot of good things to say about Roman Holiday. But that's my number 3. Andrew, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is a film you've already mentioned. I mean, there's going to be a lot of overlap there. It is Audrey Hepburn after all. And my number 2 is Sabrina, from 1954, like Dan already said, directed by Billy Wilder, starring Humphrey Bogart and William Holden. In this film, Audrey Hepburn has that transformation from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan. But let's be real, it's Audrey Hepburn. She's always gorgeous, so it doesn't really quite work. But it's nice to see them actually attempt that storyline. But also, she goes from being this very shy, very almost mousy type daughter of the household chauffeur, who is, you know, probably grown up around these guys and has always admired them. But of course, she wants the younger, handsomer, the bad boy of the bunch, and that is William Holden's character. You know, he's the one who's, you know, every woman wants to be with him. Every guy wants to be him. The Humphrey Bogart character, like Dan said, is the more straight-laced, the more responsible, the less appealing of the two, to some, if you will. But he is the one who really loves her. He probably loved her before she went off to Paris and she went to the school where she became, you know, she learned how to cook and be sophisticated and all this stuff. There's a wonderful scene with her trying to learn how to cook in this Parisian school with this chef who just can't stand her, doing screwing up all the time and stuff. It's a great, wonderful film, and it's also a great romantic film as well. And it's also a wonderful follow up to a film that Dan already mentioned, Roman Holiday. This would be her second film after Roman Holiday being her first, and you could just see how how bright she is on screen, how lovable and just charismatic she is, and just lovely to watch on screen. I love Sabrina. I think it's a great film. I've actually never seen the remake with Harrison Ford, which some people say is actually better than the original, which I disagree with, even though I haven't seen it, because I mean this is Audrey. You can't replace Audrey Hepburn. You can't replace Bill Holden or Humphrey Bogart. I mean, try as you will, you can't replace these iconic all-time actors and actresses. I mean, yeah, it's almost interesting that they even tried, but remakes happen all the time. But yes, Sabrina is my number 2. I've always loved this film. Billy Wilder, like Dan said, is an all-time famous director of American cinema. I mean, this was kind of in the middle of his filmography, kind of when he was doing a lot of different films, and Sabrina is one of his most well-known.
Absolutely. My number 2 is a film that Andrew already mentioned. Like Andrew said, there's going to be some crossover because Audrey Hepburn's filmography is not necessarily the largest, but at the top of her filmography, she has a good 6 or 7 just great films. So it's hard to come up with a lot of different films on a top 5 list. But I had to put Breakfast at Tiffany's at number 2. Holly Golightly, just like Andrew said, it's one of her most iconic characters to date. I mean, not only, you talk about the black dress, but the whole aesthetic of the film, Andrew, is just so beautiful and so gorgeously done. I mean, how could you not want to live in that world that she lives in Breakfast at Tiffany's? You know what I mean? And of course, you have you have the guy that moves into her building, and she's got a, like Andrew said, she's basically a high-priced escort. Yeah, and so she kind of likes to be around men, but she also likes to get paid to be around men, and she uses that money for very good reasons: buying dresses, going out and going to nice restaurants, being beautiful, and that transcends from the screen to the people watching the film. She's just a breathtaking woman to look at in this film. And that's one of the great parts about Breakfast at Tiffany's. I mean, do we have some great actresses today? Do they look beautiful in dresses and gowns and you name it? But I would argue there may not have been a more beautiful actress on screen in any movie ever than Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. She is just a sight to behold in this film. She is just so beautiful. The fashion is a character of its own in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and that's why it's such a great film. And the obviously, it sounds like she would be a character out of a James Bond movie. Holly Golightly. I mean, doesn't it sound like a Bond girl instead of just a regular name of a character? But that would have been a throwback to the old Bond characters, or even today, some of the characters, Pussy Galore or Zanya Onatop, or Holly Golightly. I mean, it sounds such an interesting name for a character. But she's beautiful in the film. George Peppard, we know him from a few different things. But one thing we know him from is the A-Team. We also have Buddy Epson. Buddy Epson from I think it's the Andy Griffith Show, right? Buddy Epson was on that?
I believe so.
No. It wasn't Andy. It was Beverly Hillbillies.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He played her father.
Yeah. He played her father. And so George Papard, we know him from the A-Team. And so, like you said, also, oh God, Mickey Rooney's in the film. But the star, I mean, it's obviously the star of this film is Audrey Hepburn. It just, oh God, I can't get my eyes off of how, I mean, my brain away from how beautiful she was in this film, Andrew. I mean, maybe it's just me.
Oh no, there's a reason why she's most well associated with this movie. It is that image of Audrey Hepburn. When people think Audrey Hepburn, they think of her in Breakfast at Tiffany's.
All right, Andrew, what is your number one?
My number one is a film that Dan already mentioned, and that is Roman Holiday. I love this movie. I can't quite quantify why I love it so much. I mean, I tried to in 52 must see movie episode that I just shot right before this, but it's just there's something so magical about Audrey Hepburn in this film. I think the fact that it is her first role and for her to arrive on the scene in this manner and just be so fantastic and to win her only Oscar for this film is quite impressive. Like it blows me away that she was able to come relatively out of obscurity, star opposite Gregory Peck, who at the time was a big name star, and just completely steal every scene that she's in with him and really be the star of this movie and have this film be a breakout film of her career is just something I found very unique about this, almost lightning in a bottle-esque. And like Dan said, she plays a princess who is fed up with being a princess. She kind of wants to be normal, you know what I mean? It's kind of exciting. She finds normalcy to be more exciting than her, you know, aristocratic life as a princess. And she runs into the Gregory Peck character, and they have this wonderful kind of day and night of just kind of a whirlwind adventure of traveling through Rome, seeing all the sights, you know, having lunch, you know, doing all like the touristy type things. Just being a normal person is so much to her in this film. It really makes you appreciate how normal our lives are and how we take that for granted. So I really like the themes in this film. And of course, there is a wonderful a budding romance in this film between Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn. But unfortunately, the film brings us back down out of this dreamlike day, out of this, you know, this wondrous day, and reality kicks in. And we have to go back to the lives that we have to go back to, our obligations, rule our lives. And the film was bold enough to have a very bittersweet ending, which not a lot of films at the time, I think, were doing, because, you know, they wanted films to be very escapist, you know. Yes, all your dreams can come true at the movie theater. That's why you go see them. But this film was like, no, you have to come back to your life, even if your life isn't what you want it to be, and something else out there could be better. You reality is what it is, and it's a film that I've loved ever since I first saw it, and I still love it now. That's why it's my favorite Audrey Hepburn film.
Yeah, very good choice. I had a feeling you were going to have Roman Holiday as your number one after doing the 52 and all that stuff. But something I want to ask you, Andrew, maybe you could shed some light on this. Have we seen something like this before, whether it be in a Disney movie or another movie where somebody was playing a princess and they decided to get out of their life and go on some kind of an adventure, then by the end they have to go back to being a princess again, or something like that?
I mean, the main arc, the main, you know, story structure of the film is something that's inherent in all of not in all of, but it's inherent in the romantic comedy genre. I mean, we saw it in It Happened One Night. Me and Steven mentioned the film is very reminiscent of that. But yeah, a lot of films have done this thing before. I'm trying. I mean, there's a lot of films that have done it, and I can't remember off the top of my head. But it does seem like something that has happened before. I mean, yeah, most definitely. I can't. I'd have to do more research on it, but yeah, it's definitely happened. Just
Yeah,
because it's been reused a lot.
that's what I mean. It seems like this we've seen this before somewhere, and I just can't put my finger on it right now. You know what I mean? Because it seems like an obvious thing. I'm like, wow, this is where this is. We've seen this in this movie. This is where it came from, Roman Holiday. I'm like, oh, this seems like a trope that Disney would have used over and over and over again.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, not even a Disney story, but like something like The Prince and the Pauper, where but that's more of a swap of aristocrat and poor and a poor person. But we've seen kind of people in high places in society be brought down to our level or even below our level and kind of see what it's like to be normal and then return back there with a whole new outlook at life. That type of writing has been throughout cinema.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. With that being said, my number one is a film Andrew already mentioned. It's a film that I grew up with this as a kid, and I am a fan of musicals, and I love musicals, and I love My Fair Lady. I resonated with My Fair Lady as a kid because of my upbringing and my background of growing up and so forth. I thought to myself, oh my God, I could be taken from obscurity and somebody could take me and bring me into their world and I could become a big shot, And of course that never happened, but I still love this film. I love, and I'm going to get into it in a second. It has nothing to do with Audrey Hepburn, but Liza Doolittle. I mean, what a just a great character by Audrey Hepburn. I mean, if you didn't know it was Audrey Hepburn, you wouldn't have known. She was so believable as this flower girl on the streets of London that it didn't even look like her. I mean, it didn't even sound like her. It was only when Rex Harrison's character convinces her to start doing things the way he wants her to do them and start, doing her vowels and doing all her voice work and the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain, singing all that stuff, doing all that stuff. And she finally gets it. And then he dresses her up. Then we realize, oh, well, that's Audrey Hepburn because nobody looks like that but Audrey Hepburn. And she was gorgeous in those scenes. And she was, she had the Prince of, that's where I saw Prince. It was the Prince of Tanzania, not Tanzania. Oh God, Dracula, Transylvania. Transylvania was in My Fair Lady, and he goes and he starts dancing with her, and that's when we know she was believable. From going, he had 6 months. Rex Harrison had 6 months to take her from flower girl on the streets of London with her Cockney accent and turn her into a beautiful speaking person, the whole 9 yards. And, Rex Harrison, this is a breakout role for him because he had a huge, huge controversy in his life. And he was ostracized from Hollywood for many, many years based on something that happened like back in the 40s or something like that. So this is the role he did it on Broadway where he wasn't ostracized, and then they were like, oh, we want you to be in the movie, and he got back into Hollywood's good graces with My Fair Lady. We know him also, I think, as Dr. Dolittle. I love Dr. Dolittle. Not the Eddie Murphy Dr. Dolittle, but he was the first Dr. Dolittle. He was great as Dr. Dolittle. But it's also got another cool actor in it that Mr. What's his name? Oh God, I can't think of the guy. This old guy that I just love him. When you see this guy in the movies, you know who it is. It's Wilford Hyde White. Wilford Hyde White. He plays Colonel Hugh Pickering. And then also Stanley Holloway plays her father, Alfred P. Doolittle. It's just such a beautiful, wonderful, fun movie to be around. I mean, have you not like singing these songs? Get me to the church. Get me to the church on time. I mean, if you're not singing these songs, but after you watch this movie, you're doing something wrong. Because this movie is such a catchy, fun movie to be around. And, like you said, Henry Higgins, he's a little abusive to Eliza, but he's trying to help her. He's trying to get her to do what he needs her to do to become a better person, a better woman. And so, but in the end, he redeems himself because he tells her, I'm a better person for having you around. He wants her around. He wants her in his life, and so it's a fun, beautiful film. And I'll tell you what, I love it. To this day, I will never, ever get sick of My Fair Lady. I don't know. People that don't like musicals, I just don't understand. Musicals are so fun. They just bring a brighter, funner, entertaining side to movies. We don't have as many musicals anymore like they did back in the day. We got so many classics back in the day. We just don't have as many like we used to have. But this is one of my all-time favorites, and that's why it's my number one film on my Audrey Hepburn top 5 weekly. Andrew, do you have any honorable mentions?
Yes, I do. One film that Dan mentioned, Wait Until Dark, I also think is fantastic. It almost made my top 5, but I just like Charade a little more. I mean, there are so many films that Audrey Hepburn did. How to Steal a Million, that she did with Peter O'Toole, I think is a wonderful, delightful film. The Nun Story is a great film as well. A bit more of a dramatic film from Audrey Hepburn, really kind of stretching her dramatic legs. Love in the Afternoon is another film that a lot of people love. But yeah, there are so many films that that she did. She did work, from the 50s all the way up into the 70s and 80s, up until her death. And in the early 90s, I believe she passed away. She passed away due to an illness, very sad. And also at a very young age. She wasn't terribly old. She passed away at 63. It would have been nice to have seen her live a little longer, not to die in such a very harsh way. Dying through a disease can be very difficult. But Dan, I'm pretty sure you have a whole list of films.
Well, I actually have one you already mentioned. I had Charade.
Yes.
And one that you didn't mention that until I saw Wait Until Dark, it was on my list. I had to kick it off, and that's Funny Face.
Yes, Funny Face.
She plays Jo Johnson, a bookstore employee, and by accident, Fred Astaire takes her picture while he's doing fashion photography, and then he's struck by her beauty, and he wants to make her into this fashionista and whatnot. And Funny Face, another reason why Audrey Hepburn's one of the most gorgeous women in the history of Hollywood. She just, the dresses, the just everything about her, the way she represents herself on screen, she's just breathtaking to look at. And she fills out these clothes and in this fashion, kind of the Paris fashion scene very well. And once again, she acts opposite heavyweights. We talked about it. Gregory Peck, Cary Grant, Fred Astaire. I mean, look at the guys she's acting opposite, and she's holding her own against these heavyweights of her time. It's amazing. It's just amazing what a great career this woman had. And I was glad that I had a chance to rewatch some of her films. I love doing these top 5 weeklies because I get to rewatch some of the films I haven't watched in a while, or revisit films that I have watched that I hadn't watched ever, like Wait Until Dark. But Andrew, this is the show. Where can you be found, my friend?
You can find me on Twitter at Capzilla06. as well as my YouTube channel, Capzilla Productions.
And sorry if this episode is a few days late. I've been very, very busy. You can find me at Dan Skip Allen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. Also, at the Best Damn Movie Show, we do a bunch of these shows. You can go back and look at all the other episodes of the Top 5 Weekly and the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. We got one more episode left of Classics Month, and it's a doozy. We got film noir, classic film noir films next week. And we're going to bring our Batgirl collaborator, Stephen Billings. We're going to dust him off, take him out of the mothballs, and get him to talk about film noir films. So for Andrew and myself, good night.